Hey there, my name is Benjamin John, and I'm a student at the University of St. Thomas. Today I'm going to talk to you about an astonishing region within the United States called the Great Plains. We'll also take a look at a daring proposal called the Buffalo Commons. The Great Plains is a large region that covers nearly a fifth of America's lower 48 states, yet it barely contains 6% of the U.S. population. It starts at the 98th meridian and extends all the way west to the Rockies. The landscape used to be filled mostly with midgrass and shortgrass prairies. However, most of that land has now been plowed up to be used for agriculture and development. For the most part, the population of the Great Plains has been steadily growing. However, this is attributed to the metropolitan areas, which accounts for over 75% of the Great Plains population. If you look at the individual counties, over half of them are decreasing in population. This is because people are moving from the rural areas to the more urban ones. On this map, the counties colored purple are the counties that have decreased in population since the year 2000. As you can see, most of these purple counties are located within the Great Plains. The majority of loss is occurring in the rural counties of Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and North and South Dakota. These rural and small town counties are emptying out, and it makes it seem like the American frontier is somehow re-emerging. The term American frontier refers to the wave of westward expansion that began with the colonial settlements in the early 17th century. Frederick Jackson Turner was an influential historian who theorized that the conquest of the frontier was one of the defining characteristics of the American people. He explained this in his Frontier Thesis, which he presented in 1893. He said that western expansion was one of the most important factors in American history. However, in 1890, the Census Bureau declared the American frontier to be officially closed. Turner's definition of the frontier employs a 6-person per square mile rule invoked by the Census Bureau. Today, there are numerous counties that still fit that definition. I created this map, which shows that there is still a vast frontier today, and most of it is located within the Great Plains. The counties colored green have a population density of less than 6 people per square mile. This means that the frontier never really closed, but rather it changed. Back in 1987, Frank and Deborah Popper, husband and wife geographers, wrote an article titled "The Great Plains from Dust to Dust." In this article, they proposed a controversial idea that involved converting the frontier regions of the Great Plains into vast nature preserves where buffalo can roam freely. They argued that it is not economically viable to use certain parts of the Great Plains for agriculture, and that it would be more ecologically beneficial if the lands were restored in order to create a healthier life for the region. The estimated size of this preserve would be over 139,000 square miles, affecting 10 states. If their proposal were to come true, the Buffalo Commons would become one of the world's largest preserves. The Poppers created a map that displayed the most suitable lands in the Great Plains to implement these preserves. To define which counties of the Great Plains should be included in the Buffalo Commons, they used 5 criteria. There had been a population loss of 50% or more between 1930 and 1988. It needed to have low population density, less than 4 people per square mile. The median age had to be at least 35 years old. 20% or more of the population had to be in poverty. And finally, there needed to be $50 or less new construction investment per capita. If the county met 3 of these 5 thresholds, the county was considered to be in great distress and was a viable candidate for the Buffalo Commons. So the purpose of my analysis was to see if there are still distressed areas within the Great Plains today that would be suitable for a Buffalo Commons preserve, according to those standards created by Frank and Deborah Popper in 1987. So basically, I recreated their study by testing their original hypothesis, but with using more recent 2010 census data. Here's the model that I created. I used the same 5 variables that the Poppers used: population density, population change, median age, household income, and construction investment per capita. These 5 maps are the outcomes of those 5 individual variables. If the county is green, then it met that specific criteria. These maps illustrate that the majority of people are moving out of the rural plains, and the older populations are the ones to stay behind. It also shows that living in those areas isn't that profitable and that not much money has been invested into construction. So next I took those 5 maps and combined them into one. Each county gets a value from 0 to 5. 0 meaning the county's doing fine, 5 meaning the county's really struggling. According to the poppers, if the county met 3 of the 5 thresholds, it was considered to be in distress. These distressed counties are colored in shades of green. Here are the map of distressed counties side by side with the poppers' original map. I want to point out that on the poppers map, only the dark colored counties are the ones in distress. The light colored ones are actually metropolitan areas. As you can see, the number of distressed counties in the Great Plains has dramatically increased. The number of counties in distress in 1980 was 110. In 2010, there were 297 distressed counties. That number nearly tripled just in that 30-year time period. To give you a better visual of the increase, I overlaid the 2 maps. The counties highlighted blue are the ones that were in distress in 1980. The green ones are the ones that have become distressed since then. There are a few counties that are colored dark gray. These are the ones that were in distress but no longer are. As you can see, there are very few of those. Most of the counties got worse over this time period. So one of the problems with the poppers' initial study was that they only used county level data. This is a problem because it doesn't show variability within counties. For example, there could be a county where a city is doing really well, but the rural areas are declining. Using only county level data wouldn't detect that variance. It'd be better to use a smaller scale, such as tracts or block groups. This is a visual to help illustrate the difference between those different scale levels. Part of the reason why the poppers use only county level data is due to the fact that they didn't have access to the higher quality data and technology during the time in which they did their study. So to address this issue, I used the same model that I created earlier, but instead of using county data, I used tract and block group level data. Using a smaller scale will give us a more detailed map to help us get a better idea of which areas truly are in distress. Here you can see the 3 maps using the different scales. As the scale decreases from county to tract, then to block group, you can see the total area of distressed regions increasing. This actually just magnifies the situation of the Great Plains being in distress even more so. Another problem with the poppers' initial map was that they were missing some significant variables that determine the overall health of an area. The variables that the poppers used were mainly demographic, meaning they only dealt with population data. They're specifically missing some environmental variables. Just because a county is struggling with population loss doesn't actually mean the land is viable for restoration. To address this issue, I added a couple new variables to my model to help give it a more detailed result. This map shows the areas within the Great Plains where restoration of the landscape would be feasible. If we were to actually implement a Buffalo Commons preserve, we're not going to go out tearing down old developed areas because it'd be way too inefficient. We'd rather want to find land that could be realistically restored, for example, abandoned or unused farmland. Now this map shows areas based on their distance away from roads. You can see that the red areas represent major highways, the yellow represents smaller roads, and the green areas represents land not surrounded by roads. These green areas are desired because in order to create a successful Buffalo Commons, the buffalo need to be placed in areas far away from high-flowing human traffic. So I took those 2 new maps, the friction of distance map and the suitability for restoration map, and I added those variables to my original map. Here's the model that I used to accomplish this. What this model does is that it takes my original recreated poppers map and removes all areas not suitable for restoration. It then adds in a friction of distance layer. The result is a map that shows areas that aren't near roads, where restoration is feasible, and that meets the poppers' definition of being in distress. And here's the resulting suitability map. This gives us a more detailed look at the suitable lands for Buffalo Commons Preserve. As you can see, there are multiple hotspots represented by darker colors that scored high values. These areas would give the best chance of a successful Buffalo Commons. Let's now zoom in on one of these areas and see why it's valued so highly. I zoomed in on a hotspot in northwestern Nebraska, which happens to be the Nebraska Sandhills. The Sandhills is a region of mixed grass prairie on stabilized sand dunes. For the most part, these lands haven't been disturbed. This is in part due to the fact that it's difficult to farm the land. The minimal crop production in the area has resulted in minimal habitat fragmentation. There's extensive habitat for plant and animal species in the Sandhills. The biodiversity of this area has been for the most part preserved. Part of the reason of this is because of the numerous protected lands in this area. There's the Crescent Lake National Wildlife Refuge, the Valentine National Wildlife Refuge, Fort Niobrara National Refuge, and the Nature Conservancy's Niobrara Valley Preserve. The combined area of these preserves total over 145,000 acres. I also did some research to see if raising buffalo in this landscape is feasible. I found out that there are already multiple ranches within this area that are successfully raising bison for tourism, hunting, and food production. It's easy to see how an area like this could potentially be included in a buffalo commons. So in conclusion, I analyzed the Pauper's initial 1987 Buffalo Commons proposal, and I was then able to recreate it and improve upon it by using more recent 2010 census data. The results of my analysis show that the Pauper's predictions of the declining health of the region were in fact correct. The number of counties in distress had significantly increased. This creates a strong argument for the need to protect and restore these lands. For future research, I recommend adding even more significant variables, such as land value, proximity to already protected lands, and proximity to Native American lands. It would also be beneficial to study current bison ranches to see what factors would lead to a successful bison herd. The Buffalo Commons started out as nothing but a dream of the Paupers. However, due to foresighted ranchers, non-governmental organizations, many Native American tribes, and simply people who appreciate bison and native prairies, it's starting to look like the idea of the Buffalo Commons is having a comeback, especially in the northern plains. So the question is no longer whether Buffalo Commons will occur, but rather how.